A world where might makes right, anarchic and devoid of peace and tranquility. One where warring states pillage and carry treasure across borders, only for it to be taken back in a cycle that constantly repeats. This is the world that Alexander Hamilton feared would take hold should the United States break its union. A quick note before we get into this is that I'm filming on January 8th, 2026. This year's started with a series of events that have sent shock waves throughout the world, and most importantly to me, fractures throughout our union. My thoughts have not matured enough for me to feel comfortable giving my opinion on these things, but I hope that we, the people, can come together and self-correct before more violence falls upon us. This script was written a few weeks ago, and now that I'm coming back to it, it has a very odd vibe. But with that being said, let's get into it. Federalist 6 picks up where 5 left off, although now Publius's pen has been transferred back to Hamilton from J. Now that causes for war have been established and arguments in favor of the Union have been set, Hamilton now takes us on a deep dive about the nature of states and the wars that they wage. This paper, however, unlike the previous ones, focuses on the war between the states of our Union and why that's bound to happen should we abandon the unity that binds us together. He lists causes for war, including jealousy, power, and domination, as well as the competition that exists between the interests of commercial nations. It seems that there was an argument at the time that the states would never go to war with each other because commercial nations find more value in cooperative trade rather than the practice of war. Hamilton thoroughly tears this apart with example after example of commercial states that made war constantly. Athens, Carthage, Venice, Holland, Britain, France, Spain, all commercial empires that made war just as frequently, if not more often, than royal empires. He also brings back the point that bordering nations will naturally become rivals and increase the causes for war between them. After reflecting on these histories, he offers us this. From this summary of what has taken place in other countries, whose situations have borne the nearest resemblance to our own, what reason can we have to confide in those reveries which would seduce us into an expectation of peace and cordiality between the members of the present Confederacy and the state of separation? Have we not already seen enough of the fallacy and extravagance of those idle theories which have amused us with the promises of an exemption from the imperfections, the weaknesses, and the evils incident to societies in every shape? Is it not time to awake from the deceitful dream of a golden age, and to adopt as a practical maxim for the direction of our political conduct that we, as well as the other inhabitants of the globe, are yet remote from the happy empire of perfect wisdom and perfect virtue? The solution to these problems, as we might expect, is in the Union, but Hamilton really drives home the point that a weak Union will do little good in preventing war or unrest among American people. He cites Shays' Rebellion, revolts in North Carolina, and unrest in Pennsylvania as reasons as to why the Union under the Articles of Confederation is far too weak. Now that Hamilton has made clear that commercial republics will go to war just as much as any other society, he uses Federalist 7 to list 5 specific points as to why the states of the Union might go to war with each other. The first and maybe most obvious reason would be territorial disputes. After the Revolution, there were many ambiguous lands that the states fought over. The solution was to give them as federal land to the Union and have the Supreme Court settle disputes thereafter. Without the Union, however, these disputes would continue, and he lists a few examples like the creation of Vermont, as well as territorial disputes between Pennsylvania and Connecticut over territories in Wyoming. You might think this is a largely settled issue, but territorial disputes still happen all the time within the borders of the United States. These often include fights over water rights, moving borders like rivers, and what duties fall under whose jurisdiction. The second reason that he gives is competition in commerce. This is one we've already talked about quite a bit, but his thoughts here largely revolve around the idea that states would not respect the trade policies of other states, especially when they think that there's something to benefit from ignoring them. The third reason he lists here is what he refers to as tributaries. These are reminiscent of the taxes that a place like Athens would impose on city-states that it dominated. But what he's basically talking about here is import tax and tariffs that a large state like New York could impose on a smaller one like New Jersey. And he wonders how long peace could maintain in a situation like this. The fourth problem is public debt from the Revolution. Without the Union, Hamilton thinks it would be impossible for states to come to an agreement on who has to pay how much and how to hold them to it. This would present the dual problem of external invasion as well as internal fighting. The fifth and final example in Federalist 7 is laws that contradict pre-existing contracts. He thinks that individual state governments would create laws that would restrict free trade between neighboring states, as well as violating previous contracts. This one is interesting because he actually thinks it would be an uprising of citizens that would threaten war rather than states themselves mobilizing. After considering all of these issues, as well as recalling the previous papers so far, he leaves us with this conclusion. The probability of incompatible alliances between the different states or confederacies and different foreign nations, and the effects of this situation upon the peace of the whole, have been sufficiently unfolded in some preceding papers. From the view they have exhibited of this part of the subject, this conclusion is to be drawn: that America, if not connected at all, or only by the feeble tie of a simple league, offensive and defensive, would, by the operation of such drawing alliances, be gradually entangled in all the pernicious labyrinths of European politics and wars. By the destructive contentions of the parts into which she was divided, would be likely to become a prey to the artifices and machinations of powers equally the enemies of them all. Divide et impera must be the motto of every nation that either hates or fears us. Hamilton now in Federalist 8 talks about what he thinks war between the states would look like. He compares America to Europe and finds that they stand at opposite ends of a kind of war spectrum. He talks about how the borders of Europe have become heavily fortified from centuries of armed conflicts. Because of this, it's very hard to make gains in conquest, but it's also very easy to hold on to what you have. He observes that the situation is opposite in America. Vast, undefended lands that would lend themselves to frequent and plunderous conquests with gains that would be almost impossible to keep a hold of. He sees this kind of war as ravaging the states and causing the people to flock to institutions that would destroy their rights and liberties. This is not at all dissimilar to the discussion we had in the last video about Ben Franklin's famous quote. The institution that he's referencing is standing armies. He says that standing armies lead to tyranny because their mere presence leads to an arms race between states to see who can have a more powerful one, as well as their existence lends to them doing what they were trained to do: conquest, and to get rich while doing it. He also thinks that standing armies will lead to the concentration of power in the executive and lead to monarchy and the destruction of the republic. He goes on a bit about how these are observations of human nature based on the history of Europe and not conjecture, and that he feels that the activities of a republic are counter to that of a standing army. He then compares and contrasts the situation of states that are rarely in danger of invasion versus states that are in constant danger. He says in the first situation that standing armies cannot be justified beyond a small contingency, where the people could easily overpower it. In this situation, people would be in no danger of tyranny because they're stronger than the army. However, in states that are in constant danger of invasion, the situation is reversed. The people's rights are in constant threat from the military power of the government. Not only that, but because soldiers are necessary for the public defense, they're exalted, and the citizen is denigrated. Hamilton suggests that the first, more fortunate situation would be the fate of the Union, while the second, more desperate situation would be the fate of any separate states or confederacies. He leaves us with a call for the people to take these questions into cool and mature consideration, because these are the things that will be dependent upon the adoption of the Constitution. This last paper we'll talk about today is Federalist 9. Hamilton gets into a discussion about Montesquieu and why a Confederate Republic is not only possible, but the best option for the people to defend against factions and insurrections. Keep in mind going forward that a Confederate Republic means a republic of states. They use that phrase a lot in the Federalist. Let's give the briefest of explanation of who Montesquieu is. He was a French judge who lived during the first half of the 1700s, and he is the originator of the idea of separation of powers. He wrote about it in his book, The Spirit of Law, which had a tremendous influence on the Constitution and the U.S. government. There's a lot more to say about him, but for the context of our discussion today, that's all that we need to know. Basically, the people that were arguing against the Constitution were arguing that the Union was too large for a functioning democracy based on Montesquieu's definitions. Hamilton absolutely dunks on these guys by spending half the paper just straight up quoting Montesquieu and pointing out that the size restrictions that they're arguing about would apply to what we call a pure democracy, while Montesquieu has an entirely different kind of government, a Confederate Republic designed to overcome those problems. He further defends the Union by pointing out that the ideas of democracy and the science of government have advanced quite a lot since the ancients, and so even if in the past a large Confederate Republic would have been impossible, today that's not the case. He also starts a conversation about factions that James Madison is going to pick up in the next paper in his first entry to the Federalist. Now, this is one of the longer papers, and you should definitely look into Montesquieu and his ideas, but for this summary, that's about all you need to know about Federalist 9. So I'm going to leave you with the second to last paragraph in the paper. The definition of a Confederate Republic seems simply to be an assemblage of societies or an association of two or more states into one state. The extent, modifications, and objects of the federal authority are mere matters of discretion. So long as the separate organization of the members be not abolished, so long as it exists by the constitutional necessity for local purposes, though it should be in perfect subordination to the general authority of the Union, it would still be, in fact and in theory, an association of states or a confederacy. The proposed Constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate, and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government. So there's our summary of 6 through 9. A lot of what Hamilton has to say in these papers are just kind of gritty details of what Jay gave us in the last four. So I've kind of said a lot of what I have to say about the topic, although there's a couple things that I'd like to add. For one, these papers make me realize just how fortunate we are to have a union at all. We often take for granted the fact that we are a union and how big and different each state is, and how just absolutely incredible it is that these country-sized states would ever willingly band together at all. It makes the Union just feel so much more fragile and precious than I viewed it before. Not really sure how else to say that. I mean, the founders really pulled off one for the ages to be able to put this country together at a time where something like the American experiment was unheard of is truly breathtaking and incredible. And the fact that we're still here at all shows the absolute wisdom and dedication that they had towards the project. We've made it 250 years so far, and it's time to see if we can make it another 250. I also learned here that I need to read Montesquieu. He just seems absolutely foundational in understanding how republicanism works. The last thing that I have for today is a brief mention of the factions that Hamilton brings up at the end of Federalist 9. Like I said before, this is a setup to the conversation that Madison will be having in the next paper. And man, I was just absolutely excited to read that one for the first time. I was really looking forward to seeing what Madison has to say because I knew going into it that he was one of the most influential people behind the Constitution. I mean, he's literally called the father of the Constitution. And oh boy, I am hyped for that video. Hamilton and Jay are incredible writers, but Madison just absolutely blows both of them out the water, in my opinion. It's a fantastic and incredibly important read, so stay tuned for that one. So that's all that I have for this video. Because of the intermediate nature of these four papers, just kind of fleshing out what we already talked about in the last four and just barely touching on what we'll get onto next, it turned out to be a lot more summary and a lot less analysis. But trust for that next video, that will not be the case. And also, please forgive my more drab tone for this video, given the context that I'm filming in and the content of the papers. I didn't really feel like my regular tone was appropriate for this one. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it. And if you did, I'd appreciate a like, comment, subscribe. Your engagement with my videos really does mean a lot to me. Anyway, stay safe, stay curious, and above all, stay united. I'll see you in the next one.